This is Audiovisual Lecture 6, Part 3. We've been talking about constant speed propellers and how they use air resistance to control the speed of the propeller to keep it constant. So we've looked at the cutaway of the propeller hub, how oil pressure, this is a little more accurate to the direction, so the engine's here, we're moving forwards this way. Oil pressure comes in here, pushes on this plate, which moves this whole arm upwards, or outwards rather, and that turns or twists the propeller blades in opposite directions. As this moves back inwards, it twists the blades in the opposite direction, so you kind of have a twisting motion like so. Now, how do we accomplish that? So what is a governor, and how does the governor have any idea how fast the propeller is moving? Who cares? How does it know, right? All right, so you have a control in the cockpit, obviously, that controls this. Just like the throttle, you move it in and out to control the speed of the propeller. So let's say we were using 2,000 RPM as an example before. So let's say you're flying along and you adjust the control inside the cockpit. You tell it, I want 2,000 RPM. So you set the control until the RPM gauge reads 2,000 RPM. So the governor sits inside the propeller hub, and when it's at 2,000 RPM, this is what it looks like. Not literally, but you get the idea. Alright, so again, we're going to orient this to the direction of the propeller. So this is the engine over here. We're going forwards like this. The propeller is up and down, like this, and it's turning and so forth. So these are what are called flyweights right here, and they will move outwards and inwards. Each of them will move outwards and inwards. It's kind of like a yo-yo, maybe, or a merry-go-round. One of those, not a merry-go-round, but one of those amusement park rides where all the seats are on, it's like a giant swing set, and the whole thing spins, and the swings move outward with centrifugal force. So when you adjust that control in the cockpit, what you're doing is adjusting a spring right here, and that adjusts the tension on the merry-go-round or the amusement park ride, such that when the gauge reads 2,000 RPM, these flyweights, so the swings on the merry-go-round, are set to be straight out at 2,000 RPM. And when they're straight out, that locks in the blade angle and keeps it right there at 2,000 RPM. That's equilibrium, everything's set and happy, and the propeller is turning at 2,000 RPM. Now, let's suppose, like we said earlier, that we pitch upwards because we want to climb, or because we pull the power back, and the engine starts to turn slower, so the propeller starts to turn slower, right? Well, what's going to happen is these flyweights right here are going to start to move inwards because they're spinning. They're not spinning as fast. So when you're on the amusement park ride on the swing and your centrifugal force is swinging you way out, when the operator sees people flying off of it, he says, uh-oh, lawsuit, and so he slows the machine down, right? Well, when he does that, you're not going to be swinging out there as far because your centrifugal force is not slinging you out there quite as far, right? So you start to move inwards like this. Now, what happens, we'll go back to the right orientation here, what happens when these flyweights start to move inwards is it pushes, this is the center, of the propeller and so forth, it pushes a stopper backwards, and what it does is it allows oil pressure to drain out of the propeller. So oil pressure is draining away from the propeller. What happens when the oil pressure drains away from the propeller? This starts sliding back in, right? It's as though you had your hand pushing on this inner part to keep it out there, and the pressure's draining away, the strength is leaving you, and so your hand starts to slip away from it, and this starts to move back in. And what that does, it untwists the blades. Let's get our other example here. So it untwists the blades. It starts lowering it like this, right? It decreases the air resistance, and so the propeller starts to spin faster again, right? So bear with me. Here's 2,000 RPM. Flyweights are out there. Everything's happy. And then you start to slow down. The merry-go-round starts turning slower. Here's 1,900 RPM. So these are leaning inwards. You're dropping down on the merry-go-round. The stopper moves, back to this here. The stopper moves out, lets oil pressure bleed out of the propeller. This starts to move this way, untwists the blade. So you go from here to here. You're untwisting the blade and making it easier to turn, so it's going to turn faster and get back up to that 2,000 RPM. Now, what happens when it bleeds out enough pressure to get it back to 2,000 RPM? Well, the spring is happy again because it's found 2,000 RPM, and it goes back to being straight out, and that closes off the oil pressure, seals it in the propeller hub, and it goes back to springing at that speed setting. Now, of course, we got to do the opposite. Let's say that you push the throttle forward and the engine starts to spin faster, or you start to descend, so you're pushing more air over the propeller and it's spinning faster, or the operator of the amusement park ride slips and pushes the lever all the way forward and everybody starts spinning way out on the machine. Here's what it starts to look like. Oops. Alright, so these flyweights, which were like this, start to spin outwards like this because they're going too fast, right? What that does is that moves the stopper this way and opens up the pipe from the engine to push more pressure into it. When you push more pressure into the propeller, you're pushing this forward and you're twisting the blades like so, and you're taking the propeller that was like this, you're doing it like that. The increased air resistance slows it down to 2,000 RPM. So you're using this back and forth motion to maintain 2,000 RPM. If it's like this and it's spinning at 2,000 RPM and you start to slow, and it starts to slow down, it's going to relieve those governors. Those flyweights are going to start to fall inwards. Mechanically, that allows pressure to bleed out of the engine, causing the propeller blade to untwist and go back like this. Easier to turn, so it's going to turn faster, get back up to this 2,000 RPM. Now it starts to spin too fast. The flyweights are going to spin outwards and allow oil pressure to go into the engine and start twisting the blades. More air resistance, it's going to slow them down to 2,000 RPM. Now, like we said before, this isn't a series of clunky, back and forth motions. This is actually a very smooth motion that is happening constantly. It's kind of like if you have two opposing forces, you have, this is one force, this is the other force, and they're both pushing on each other. This is too fast, this is too slow, and they're meeting in the middle at just right. So as one overpowers the other moves to compensate for it. So maybe to the left is slower, to the right is faster. As you encounter things in flight, like slowing down the engine or speeding up the engine or climbing or descending, each force pushes against the other to keep everything equalized. And again, just to recap, we're doing that by twisting the propeller blades back and forth like this to speed up or slow down the speed of the propeller and keep it at a constant speed. So that's the overview of a constant speed propeller and how it works. Now, it should be noted at this point that this is for a single engine airplane, because multi-engine airplanes work entirely differently. So this is just for a single engine constant speed propeller. we've really gotten down in the weeds on it as far as how specifically it works, as far as the concept and mechanically how that works. But this is the overview, and there'll be some reading. I think I'll also scan these images just so that you have them and can kind of look at them again. The quiz and the exam, when that comes around, is not going to be quite as in the weeds as this. We'll try to, we'll keep it pretty basic, but if you have any questions at all on propeller theory or how exactly that constant speed propeller works, let me know. Send me questions. I'll try to explain it, in a different way or as best I can. But that's the overview of propellers, and specifically the constant speed propeller and how that works. The other topics for this week are the electrical, fuel, and hydraulic systems of most airplanes. So these are explained pretty well in the Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge as far as the electrical diagrams, the fuel systems. The main thing there is just the difference between a carbureted fuel system and a fuel injection system. The other major difference is that a high-wing airplane, obviously the fuel can gravity feed, versus a low-wing airplane that requires a fuel pump to pull it out of a fuel tank. And then hydraulic systems that are used for brakes and for retractable landing gears. I think I'll let that text kind of explain those systems to you. We're not going to go into them in too much depth in this course. The second course goes into those a little bit more in more detail. So if you have any questions on those after you do the reading, let me know, and I'll go through them with you certainly. But for this lecture, the propellers are kind of the harder thing to explain just by reading it sometimes. So that's why we spent the focus on that. The exam will be next week. This is the last lecture before exam 2. And that's going to cover all material since the last exam. So this exam 2 is only going to cover the material that we've presented since the last exam. So study the reading again, maybe work through that, take a look at your notes. You can replay any of these lectures that you need to go into in more detail. It'll be the same test format, the same drill for the test proctors and submitting them and so forth, the same deadlines, but that'll all go out in a separate email, so don't worry too much about that. The key for especially this lecture and especially the lecture on stalls and spins, if you have any questions on those, let me know and we'll get them cleared up before the exam, because you definitely want to have it straight before you go into that. On the second exam, there may also be some more short answer and essay answer questions, just because we're getting to the conceptual items. So we want to make sure that you understand the material and can kind of put it into some kind of realistic scenario. But other than that, it'll be pretty much same format, multiple choice, short answer and essay answer. So this concludes audiovisual lecture 6.